What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another modern video. And this week we're taking a look at a deck that has roots planted in Magic's history from the very beginning all the way up until now with varying results in various formats. This deck is just super powerful, not in that it gets to play some super busted overpowered cards, but rather the fact that it is a lightning fast deck that punishes your opponent even if they stumble for a second, and even if they are able to answer your threats and what you have thrown at them, they still can just die out of nowhere. So today we're going to take a look at the Boros Bird deck and kind of go over my own thoughts and feelings of why I think this deck is a pretty good choice as the recording of this video. A good almost like counter pick necessarily to like what's going on in the modern format. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the deck. One. So here we have the Boros Burn deck by Bradley Martin. They took it to the SCG Con at Philly event, played in the 5K RCQ, went 4-2 with the deck, but I believe this deck is the most default version. I think the one that most players end up kind of going to, even though there is a technically a Mardu Burn deck that was playing like Bump of the Night, which I think is just kind of going like way too deep and makes your mana less consistent, even though can't really argue with like a 6-0 finish. But before we get too deep into the deck, explain kind of the ins and outs and taking a dive into it. I'd appreciate it if you have not already, and you want to support my channel. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel as well as leaving a like on the video. And even comment as well. Any thoughts, feelings that you have against like Boros Burn, maybe some good memories, really bad ones, all that fun stuff. It all helps me to grow the channel and reach more people. And with the channel growing as fast as it has in just less than a year, I would like to kind of keep that trend going and things like that. So yeah, one of the easiest ways to support the channel, just subscribe, leave a like on the video, all that. Also, if you want to talk Magic or anything like that, anything to do with like Modern Pioneer, even like Legacy and Commander and things like that, I do have a link in the description to the Discord server that I run. Uh, Go ahead, follow the link, join, and just shoot me a message, anything like that. I love talking about Magic, just as much as I love playing it. So I'm always just down to have some conversation with us about strategy, about cards in the new set, things like that. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and talk about Boros Burn. And so basically, Burn is like an archetype that has existed. Like I said in the intro, it's got deep roots in Magic. Lightning Bolt that you have right here has been a card that has been printed, numerous amounts of times. It's a card that was printed in the first ever set of Magic. Hasn't seen like a necessarily like a reprint like in Standard, but Lightning Bolt is a card that is kind of the standard for burn spells. It is 1 red and it deals 3 damage to any target. And from there, you have other cards in the deck, that do burn damage. Like Lava Spike deals 3 damage to a player or planeswalker for 1 red mana. Sorcery speed, it's good enough to be in the deck because it's efficient and it deals, really a lot of damage. I mean, it does deals as much damage as Lightning Bolt. Once you get to like the 2 mana slot, you get into cards like Boros Charm, which deal 4 damage for 2 mana instant speed, which is obviously very good. You have Lightning Helix that kind of can pull double duty. In some of like the burn mirrors, like Lightning Helix can force your opponent to like attack and then like is a whole card. I mean, gaining 3 life is a whole card, plus getting to deal them 3 damage, deal with one of their threats, things like that. Lightning Helix can do a lot of work. On top of that, too, just other aggressive decks, it can be hard for them to race. Like if they decide, okay, they need to hurry up and kill you, you have like a Goblin Guide or like a Monastery Switchword in play. You can just like Lightning Helix, kill one of their things, gain some life, or even just go straight to the face and then crack back and probably put them in a low enough life total to be able to kill them on that same turn. Searing Blaze, one of the biggest tempo plays you can make with this deck, where if you play a Goblin Guide or a Swift Spear on turn 1, and then your opponent plays like a Mana Dork, and you just go land Searing Blaze, it does amazing work for 2 reasons. One, you are always taught to bolt the bird, bolt the elf, whatever, and Searing Blaze gets to kill the creature, getting to deal 3 damage to that creature, and then it deals 3 damage to that player as well. So it's like getting to cast like a lightning bolt, or really 2 lightning bolts, one targeting the creature, one targeting your opponent's face, and you still get to push damage. Skullcrack Players can't gain life this turn. Damage cannot be prevented this turn. Deal 3 damage to target player. This card, while on rate, is obviously worse than Lightning Bolt because it costs 2 mana instead of 1. But the fact that players cannot gain life and damage can't be prevented this turn comes up a lot more often than you think when your opponents have cards like Solitude and things like that. I actually have a match against an Enchantress deck, which I will probably post sometime like this week, hopefully. And I actually won a game because of Skullcrack, and it was sweet. And you can probably piece it together if you know the Enchantress deck pretty well. But Skullcrack, just very good for what it does. Not a 4 of in the deck, but is good at what it does. And then finally, you have like Rift Bolt and Skewer the Critics, both being honorary, like 1 mana, 3 damage burn spells. Rift Bolt costing 1 mana to suspend 1, so you don't get that damage right away, but you do get it on the next turn. Can be like a fine follow-up if you play like a Monastery Swift Spear, like on turn 1, like you can like suspend a Rift Bolt, cast another spell, still get to hit for 2, and then Rift Bolt can either blow up a creature, get it out of the way, and let Swift Spear attack, or go straight to your opponent's face and pump up the Swift Spear as well. Skewer the Critics cast 1 mana, with the caveat being that your opponent has to have been dealt damage this turn. Pretty easy when you have all these direct damage burn spells and you're playing all these creatures. Essentially playing like 40 cards that have the ability to deal damage to your opponent. Now, while the burn spells are great, and I start with these because that's kind of what makes Boros burn. Boros burn is the burn spells. It's one of the easiest ways because these cards like deal the amount of damage they say. Lava Spike is always going to deal 3 damage to your opponent, barring any effects that make them gain life from you casting red spells, from being targeted, so on and so forth. Lightning Bolt is always going to deal 3 damage, Boros Charm 4. You get the picture. Your creatures, however, are the ones that are kind of up in the air. Your creatures, like Goblin Guide, Swift Spear, and Eidolon, are all going to be good like turn 1 and turn 2 plays, for the reason of you want to get in as much damage as possible early, so that if your opponent is able to gum up the ground like some of the decks can in the modern format, that your burn spells can kind of take care of it. So you have Goblin Guide, easily one of the most aggressively leaning 1 mana cards with the least amount of drawback. So it's a 1 red for 2/2 with haste, and when it attacks, the defending player reveals the top card of the library. If it's a land card, they put it into their hand. So it has the ability to draw your opponent a card if they have a land on top of their library. It also gives you some information as well as like what's in their hand, what they could be drawing, so on and so forth. The big thing being that Goblin Guide almost always on the play is going to deal 2 damage to your opponent unless they're super scared of it and they have, some kind of like free removal effect, like one of the pitch elementals, more or less being Solitude, or like any like Sickening Shoal, stuff like that, but that card really doesn't see play. More than likely, Goblin Guide is going to get in for at least 2 damage, and from there, like in conjunction with other spells, it could end up dealing more damage. There's games where Goblin Guy could deal 6, 8 points of damage, and getting to deal 8 points of damage with 1 mana is very, very good. Even if it's over the course of 4 turns, getting to deal that much damage, and you played 4 turns, so theoretically you've gotten to draw 3 more cards, you've probably drawn some more burn spells, boom, your opponent's dead out of nowhere because they couldn't deal with a 2 mana creature. Swift Spear, while normally a lot of like it's probably not going to outdamage Goblin Guide unless you have a heavy spell draw and you draw like multiple Swift Spears is one of the easiest ways to outpace a Goblin Guide. But essentially you need to cast 1 spell to have it be the power of Goblin Guide, and any spells after it you'll end up dealing more damage. But obviously being able to do that over the course of a game is very hard to do. But thankfully for a deck like this, just getting to play like a Swiss Spear on 1 and then going like Spike You, Bolt You, you end up dealing 10 damage over the course of 2 turns. Whereas you'd be doing the same damage with like Goblin Guide. So like the damage is irrelevant. It's when you go into like turn 3 and you do the same thing that you're actually dealing more damage than you would with a Goblin Guide. So like the explosive potential is there with Monastery Swift Spear. Obviously, as you draw like 2 or 3 lands, you play enough 1 mana burn spells, or even have like Rift Bolt, Skewer the Critics, so on and so forth. You are able to get Swift Spear up to like a 2 to 3 power creature pretty consistently, just about every turn that you want to end up attacking with it. Eidolon the Great Revel is a card that definitely punishes some of the more low to the ground aggressive decks. Eidolon just coming into play down and play on turn 2, or even like relatively like later in the game, like say like turn 3 or turn 4, it's totally fine. Like after you just empty your hand, your opponent is at like 8 or 6, and you slam an Eidolon in play, they have to spend a removal spell to kill the Eidolon, puts them to 4, puts them in range of Boros Charm or multiple combination of burn spells or like a bad attack away from like a Swift Spear or Goblin Guide, getting to deal those 2 points of damage, and then a 1 mana burn spell just ending the game. On top of that, too, if your opponent is not able to kill it with their first spell, they take 4, 6, 8 damage, and it goes back to like the Goblin Guides and the Swift Spears, where Eidolon is going to be the least aggressive of the creatures in this deck. It doesn't have haste. It's not attacking until turn 3. The other creatures have gotten to attack basically every turn since then. Eidolon does a lot of its damage and is going to do the bulk of its damage from its ability, essentially, of just damaging 2 damage to a player for every time they cast a 3 mana cost spell or less. Easily, probably one of like your best cards, I would say, against like control. Easily one of your best spells against like some like really low to the ground aggro decks, where maybe you're using your burn spells more defensively to like get rid of their creatures and force them to cast more creatures and things of that nature. So that's the spells for the deck. The mana base is super simple. You have 6 fetch lands, you have 4 Arid Mesa, and you have 2 Bloodstained Mire. You have 4 Inspiring Vantage and 4 Sunbaked Canyon and 2 Sacred Foundries. These are 10 lands that are going to come into play untapped in the early turns of the game. You have 4 Basic Mountain, just the most common color because you're really only fetching white for 6 cards in the main and some of these sideboard cards. Sunbaked Canyon has the added bonus of also just getting to turn into a card later. There are some versions of the deck. I believe there is a burn deck that I'm currently playing that's actually playing a Fiery Islet on top of the 4 Sunbaked Canyon just to have more drawing in the deck as well. Sideboard, you have like Path to Exile, Deflecting Palm, Core Firewalker, Roiling Vortex, Sanctifier Invec, another Skullcrack, Smash the Smithereens, and Exquisite Firecraft. The most interesting cards in these decks are kind of being like the Smash the Smithereens, kind of playing that tempo role that Searing Blaze does, except for more artifact decks instead of the creature decks, where this just gets to destroy an artifact and then it deals 3 damage to that artifact's controller. You have Sanctifier Invec that can mess with the uh, black and red graveyard-based decks or even like the black-red mid-range deck, while also forcing the cards that go to their graveyard to put in the exile instead, on top of having protection from black and from red, just making it very hard for them to get aggressive and allowing you to even get in for like 2 or 4 points of damage with this card, which again kind of fits the theme of the deck of just trying to deal as much damage as possible with every card in your deck. Roiling Vortex, please, for the love of God, do not get yourself by casting a Rift Bolt when you have a Roiling Vortex in play because it does not necessarily end well for you. Without all that being said, getting to pay a red and having your opponents not be able to gain life this turn can be very good, considering that it is not exclusive to being a sorcery, so you can just do it whenever you feel like it if your opponent is about to gain life, so on and so forth. Also, just getting to deal 1 damage to each player at the beginning of their upkeep. It's going to enable the Spectacle and your Skewer the Critics pretty reliably. Probably a borderline card that you could play in the deck. You could probably I wouldn't fight someone if they played this over like Eidolon of the Great Revel. Just Eidolon, in probably most matchups, is a little bit better than getting to punish your opponent for playing spells that cost no mana. Core Firewalker, pretty good against like the mirror and things like that. Also, whenever a player casts a red spell, you gain a life, which can make it hard for your opponent to race as well, considering that most of your deck is red spells. Deflecting Palm, a way to get your opponent, they attack with a big creature. You just deflect it right back to them, deal tons and tons of damage. Path to Exile, just being efficient removal. You don't care about them getting the land, you just care about getting them dead. Exquisite Firecraft has the ability that if you have Spell Mastery, it cannot be countered by spells or abilities, so it's a way to just get an uncounterable 4 damage to the face or to a creature. And plays its role very, very well. Was definitely a standard staple back in the day, and kind of nice to see it showing back up, even if it's in the sideboard. Some of these burn decks. So overall, this is the Boros burn deck for Modern. Essentially, the reason why I like playing it and why I have been playing it is because it does 2 things very, very well. It punishes your opponent for stumbling. Really, when you just have hands, even if you mulligan to 6, which is a deck really does not like to mulligan, where you just play like a Goblin Guide and have a few burn spells, you're able to punish your opponents that go down to 6 or 5 cards. Maybe they're relying on like mana dorks, maybe they're relying on like some other creatures to kind of get there and go up the ground. That you can just like throw your burn spells at said creatures or just at their face and really just put them on having very specific answers at specific points in the game. And where if they again continue to stumble, they're going to be dead out of nowhere and it ends up being kind of a free win. The other part of this being that some of the decks in the format, while I won't say that they're relatively slow, they don't do a very good job of going up the ground and really making it hard for you to push through damage with like your creatures and stuff like that. You'll notice the theme here that like I think the creatures are just as important as the burn spells in the deck. While it does take 7 lightning bolts to kill your opponent when your life total starts at 20, the Goblin Guides and the Monastery Swift Spears and even the Eidolons are going to deal tons of damage over the course of a game, and they're going to be the ones that will end up dealing more than 3 or 4 points of damage that your burn spells will do. If you get like Swift Spear to deal like 6 points of damage or even like 5, you know it's better on rate than a lot of the other spells that you are playing in the deck. In fact, it would be better than most of the spells that you're playing on rate. So that's my big reasons for liking the deck is super aggressive. You punish opponents and it's pretty cheap as well. All things considered for the format, you know you don't need Wrenn and Sixes, you don't need Force and Negations, you don't need anything of that nature. You just need a bunch of really efficiently costed burn spells. And some of these cards do kind of find places and slot in other decks. Eidolons kind of fit into the Pioneer format as well with like the mono red decks and things like that. Same with the Monastery Swift Spear and the lands are always going to hold value and things like that. So that is Boros Burn for Modern. If you enjoyed the video and you want to see more things like this, please leave a like on the video, leave a comment, anything about like the Burn deck, whether you like playing it, hate playing against it, some bad beats, some good beats, all things of that nature. I would love to hear them. So go ahead and leave in the comments of this video. If you want to see more videos like this, go ahead and check out the Modern Deck Tech playlist and other playlists that I have that go over the Pioneer format as well as some deeper dives coming really soon into other Modern and Pioneer decks as well. And of course, don't forget to join the Discord server. The link is in the description for that as well. So yeah, that's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next video.